Question 1. In this question, we already know that Wt is a stochastic process with the expected value EWt equals to 0. And also, the autocorrelation function RWT1 T2 equals alpha times the minimal value of T1 T2. And now we also know Yt equals Wt minus Wt minus 1. And now we have to firstly calculate the expected value of Yt. Actually, the expected value of Yt equals to the expected value of Wt minus Wt minus 1. Given by the property of expected value, we can know that there should be EWt minus 1. Since from the question, we know that the expected value of Wt is a constant and is irrelevant with that t, so there should be 0 minus 0 and 0. That's the answer of the first question, the expected value of Wt. The second one is we should find the value of RYY T1 T2. Given by the definition of autocorrelation function, that should be the expected value of Yt1 times Yt2. And when we expand this formula, that should be the expected value of Wt1 times Wt1 minus 1. Sorry about that. Wt minus Wt1 minus 1 times Wt2 minus Wt2 minus 1. And that should be EWt1 Wt2 minus Wt1 Wt2 minus 1 minus Wt minus 1 Wt2 plus Wt minus 1 Wt2 minus 1. And now given by the property of expectation, that should be alpha times minimum of T1 T2 minus minimum of T1 T2 minus 1 minus minimum value of T1 minus 1 T2, then plus minimum of T1 minus 1 T2 minus 1. And now we should find the value of this one given some condition. Condition 1 is that T1 minus T2 and T1 minus T2 is less than 1. In this case, the autocorrelation function of RT1 T2 simply equals to 0. The second case is T1 minus T2 and T1 minus 1 is larger than T2. That should be equal to T1 minus T2 is larger than 1. And in this case, RYY T1 T2 equals to alpha times 1 minus T2 minus T1. The third case is T2 is larger than T1 and T2 minus T1 minus 1. In this case, RYY T1 T2 equals to 0. And fourth, also the last case should be T2 larger than T1 and T2 minus T1 is larger than 1. In this case, the autocorrelation function should be RYY equal to alpha times 1 minus T1 minus T2. Now we have discussed all the conditions and we can make some conclusion. That is, RYY T1 T2 equals to 0 when T1 minus T2 absolutely larger than 1, and RYY T1 T2 equals to alpha times 1 minus T1 minus T2, the absolutely value. When T1 minus T2, the the absolute value is less than 1. Now in this case, we have known that the autocorrelation function of RYY is not correlated with T1 and T2, but is correlated with T1 minus T2. So it is a WSS process.